Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, The Millennial Voice in Supply Chain. I'm your host, Helen King. The first and second generations of supply chain leaders are retiring and millennials are preparing to take their places. How do you transition the personnel and culture of your organization with this new talent pool? Today, we'll talk with Ann Dozier and up-and-coming supply chain professionals Ann Kalinowski and Marcina Walker to map out the future of supply chain talent. Before I hand this over to Laura and the rest of the panel, there are a few things I want to cover with you. We are recording today's session and we'll post it to our on-demand webinars page. You can visit our website to listen to this or any of our other webinars. Additionally, we'll send out the slides to all attendees within 24 hours of this broadcast. We encourage you to share these slides with others in your organization, and if you have questions, reach out to Laura or myself to set up a discussion. We want to hear your questions about our findings, so please post to the chat or the Q&A function to the left of your screen. We've left time at the end of the webinar to address your questions. Finally, we will be live tweeting the webinar, so if you'd like to join the social media conversation, you can use the hashtag SCIWebinar and our Twitter handle at SCInsightsLLC during the event. Finally, let me introduce our host, Laura Ciceri, founder of Supply Chain Insights. As an enterprise strategist, Laura focuses on the changing face of enterprise technology. Her research is designed for the early adopter seeking first mover advantage. She comes to the stage with over 40 years of diverse supply chain experience. Welcome, Laura.
Hey, thanks so much, Helen. And 40 years of experience means that I'm a baby boomer and one of the early supply chain leaders. And I'm excited today to be joined by Ann Dozier, who I'm going to call Dozier because I also have another Ann on the panel. So Ann Dozier, tell the group a little bit about yourself and why this topic interests you.
Great. Thank you, Laura. So as Laura said, my name is Ann Dozier. I'm currently the Chief Information Officer for Southern Glazer's Wine and Spirits. We are the largest distributor of wine and spirits in the U.S. We also have businesses in Canada and the Virgin Islands. Prior to my experience at Southern Glazers, I was a member of the Coca-Cola Company's leadership team for many years and also spent some time at Dean Foods. So most of my career has been involved with direct store delivery distribution companies and delivering value through sales of top brands in the nation. So I'm excited about this topic because obviously as we continue to grow our companies and grow the capabilities of our companies, we want to make sure that we are engaging and hiring the best workforce to take our companies to the next generation.
So Ann, the very first conversation I ever had about this was with you one day in Atlanta, and you were talking about being a Gen X in the middle between baby boomers and millennials. Maybe you can share a little bit about that perspective.
Yeah, it's kind of great to sit in the middle, right? Because we have a large baby boomer community today employed in our companies and very knowledgeable, have built many of our businesses on their backs and have done an amazing job at driving companies to where they are today. We also have a new workforce coming in with the millennial generation, and the millennials think and act very differently, but they have grown up in an era of technology and they've grown up in an era of many large, very successful companies. So as a Gen Xer, it gives you the opportunity to be in the middle where you actually get to connect the boomers and the great learnings that they have from growing these businesses to the millennials who are the future thinkers and the individuals that are going to be able to apply a different type of thinking and apply more technology to our business. So obviously being a Gen Xer who also sits in the technology side of the business, it's a very exciting time for us, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to engage that millennial workforce and continue to grow our business for the future.
Awesome. And so for the rest of this webinar, I'm going to call you Dozier because I want the audience to also hear from Ann Kalinowski, who's just joined Supply Chain Insights as a research analyst, and she'll be leading our cross-company academy that's starting in May. And previously, Ann worked at Ecolab. So Ann, tell the group a little bit about yourself and why this topic interests you.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. So I'm Ann Kalinowski. I've been in supply chain and operations for about 10 years. Started off at GE and then joined Ecolab. Most recently, I was the project manager for the implementation of demand sensing software for Ecolab's North America network. And I just joined Supply Chain Insights, as Laura said, about a month ago as a research analyst. So I'll be facilitating training courses, and I'll be doing research on supply chain topics and writing research reports and blogs on those topics. And so being a millennial,
yes, you're a millennial, right?
I am. I like to say I'm on the border of Gen X and millennial, but I am technically a millennial, and just knowing, how I learn and how I work, I feel like I know the challenges millennials face, and I know how they work best, and I want to see millennials succeed and be more understood in the workforce because I believe they can push supply chain especially forward into the digital future.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Marcina, you're next. So tell the group a little bit about yourself and why this topic interests you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marcina Walker. I am currently a supply chain associate for the Clorox Company. I'm a part of a supply chain leadership development program, and I'm in my second year. It's a 3-year program. I'm currently in a business analytics type role. I am also a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force Reserve, with my unit being based out of Montgomery. And prior to this, I did an internship with the Clorox Company while in college, and I was in the logistics operations organization, and I was in college. I majored in supply chain management at Tuskegee University. And the reason why this topic is important to me is because, like Ann said, that I want millennials to be understood. I want them to have a voice, and I am all about cooperation and collaboration, and would like for all of us to work together. I know it's an awkward situation with how business is today, having 3 different generations in the workplace. So learning how everyone thinks, how everybody works, and how they can work better with millennials and how we can work better with them.
Great. So just a few logistics. We do share all the slides. There is a report that we've published on this research. We're a little bit short on academics, so if you know an academic professor or associate professor, please pass the link to them. We will be doing another comparison of views of academics and the generations in an upcoming report. So this research continues. Right now we've got about 500 responses, but we're going to share the data today with the responses we had at the time that we tabulated it. Now, by definition, we have in this chart how we've defined the greatest generation, which we did have a few responses from people that were born in the 1930 to 1945 period, the baby boomers, 1946 to 1964, which I am a baby boomer, the Gen X, which 1965 to 1984, which Ann Dozier is a Gen X, and the millennials from 1985 and 2000. And Kalinowski is on the border, and Marcina is square in that millennial bracket. So when we set up the panel, I tried to get people across the generations. And a lot has changed as we think about the generational differences. When I first started in supply chain, there was not a supply chain group. We didn't have computers on desk. We didn't have mobile phones. We didn't have career paths. A lot was unknown about this world of supply chain that was evolving. And in the study, one of the things we wanted to find out is relative job satisfaction with their supply chain career. In the study, we find that baby boomers are significantly more satisfied than Gen X and millennials, and we'll share some of the reasons why. We also find that the supply chain professionals that work for technology vendors are more satisfied than end users, primarily because of clear career paths, the type of work, and the pace of work. We also find that companies that offer remote capabilities, so some ability to work from home or local offices, are generally more satisfied than those that are not. Now, when we looked at the millennials versus the baby boomers, we found that the baby boomers are much more focused on work, the work they believe in, the leaders they admire, and the challenge of the job. On the contrast, millennials have greater needs for a well-defined career path, work-life balance, and a well-defined personal development plan. Now, when I first started doing this work, I was very surprised by this because the world of supply chain has just been evolving, and so the concept of a well-defined career path was sort of like, I don't get it. It doesn't fit for me because I see the world of supply chain 2030 is so different than the world today. But this is the research, and I want to start and have the panel give some feedback on this. So Marcina, I know you have a strong feeling about career paths and the career development plan. Why don't you share your perspective? Does this chart, first of all, reflect what you see in the workforce?
So yes, I would say that this chart does reflect what I see in the workplace, and I would actually add challenging to what one of the ideals that are more important to millennials. And I say that because when we were growing up, I was raised by a baby boomer. We were told that if you dream big, dream so big that you shoot for the moon, and if you fall, you'll at least be in the stars. So we are very, very ambitious. And with that ambitiousness, we have a desire to be the top dog. We want to be CEO. We want to be in those high positions. And we know that in order to get there, we would need a career path. We would need professional development. It would help us guide us to get there quicker. I can say personally I am impatient, so patience is a virtue. But having something that's kind of spelled out so that I know that I'm spending X amount of years in this role to develop these set of skills so that in the coming years I can promote to become the position that I want. So I feel like this is a great example of what we are looking for in the workplace. And I'll say for the challenge aspect, I like change and I want a challenge. And I got my degree so that I could use it. So make me use my degree. I like working on things that haven't been done before. And I dislike doing tasks that feel like a glorified intern type role. So give me that challenge, give me that opportunity.
Great, thank you, Marcina. And Ann Kalinowski, how about your perspective here? Does this match with your worldview?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different spin on it than Marcina. I had the opportunity to manage some interns while I was at Ecolab, and I would just overall say millennials want to do things very efficiently. So in terms of the career path and the professional development, and I even saw when I was drafting their project charters, they really want kind of a prescription for how do they get to that end goal, how do they get to be, Excel employees. So they really want to know this prescription for how to get things done so that they can do and exceed expectations.
Dozier, how about you? What do you see here being kind of the bridge between us old-timers and the baby boomers and the millennials? What do you see?
Yeah, so sitting in the middle, if I look at the organization that I lead today, I have a group of people that are amazing teachers. They've grown up with this business. They've created big pieces of this business as part of organizational teams, and ultimately they want to make sure that this business continues to grow and be successful. I also see the millennials that are coming into the workforce. They're very well educated. They have very high capabilities. They depend on building their career based on their ability to achieve results. And they want a very clear career path, and they want to make sure that that career path includes lots of opportunities for them to learn so that they can achieve what they want to achieve. So in my role, I really focus on how do I build the bridge between the two to connect the great teachers with the great learners. And I think we're really fortunate today because coming out of university today, many of the millennials that are entering the workforce have much more specialized skills than even the Gen X group did. They're very specialized degrees where they're trained in supply chain, or they're trained in technology, or they're trained in analytics. So we're very fortunate as companies to have folks coming in with those kind of skill sets. What we have to then do is we have to tie those skill sets to our business and the value that we can derive from those skill sets. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we have those early career programs that ultimately allow the millennial to be able to move throughout the organization very quickly, to learn from the boomers, and also to see stages of achievement where they see that there is career growth and there's continued opportunity for them to achieve, as Marlena said, that CEO role that they want to achieve one day. So I think we're actually in a really exciting place because, again, the boomers have so much knowledge. Most of their experience was based on building relationships, being part of teams, doing things as part of teams because they didn't have a lot of technology to depend on. Now we see the millennials coming in depending more on themselves and the tools that we have around them to be able to be successful.
You know, we have a question from Jonathan in Boston, and he's saying, you know, doesn't everyone want a career path in professional development? And you know, I don't think so. You know, when I entered the workforce in the 1980s, we were just happy to have this emerging career. We didn't know what the outcome was. And when I interview millennials, they want to know job A, then job B, and what I'm going to do to help them on the development path. I mean, it's a different kind of expectation, I find, that it's what can I do for them versus when I was a baby boomer, it's like, you know, how to roll up my sleeves and get started in this world that's unknown. So I think it's very different. Do you think it's different, Ann? Ann Dozier?
Yeah, I do think it's different. I mean, when I came out of school, I was just glad to have a job, and I was glad to have an opportunity to build a career somewhere. You know, now I think it is much more of an interest in a prescriptive path. I think today a lot of the individuals coming out of university have so many more choices, and they have a lot more companies that are recruiting them to try to bring in that educated young workforce that ultimately they will connect with the boomers to build their business. So I think that they're presented with a lot more choices than maybe we had previously. I also think that just by the nature of areas like supply chain and technology, you tend to attract very process-oriented individuals, and process-oriented individuals really enjoy understanding what their path is to achieve the goal. So I think some of that is based on the subject area that we're focused on. I think the other part of it is they tend to be in the driver's seat a bit more in the choices that they make about where they want to work and what they want the company they work for to represent in the community.
Yeah, now Ryan says that he thinks a major difference between millennials and baby boomers is the resistance to change, that millennials have grown up in a world where things change rapidly and that they're used to change. You know, Ann Kalnowski, what's your opinion of that? I mean, you've observed both.
I completely agree with that. And I think especially when you get into supply chain, which is kind of used to doing things the way they've done things, and you know, especially when you're just trying to get the product out the door to the customer, it's hard to take a step back and look at your processes and say, okay, how can we improve these processes? There's a lot of, well, hey, this is just how we've always done things. So I would completely agree with that.
And then we have a question from John, or a comment. He's saying that, you know, how can companies define supply chain with a very dynamic marketplace where things are changing so much? And John, that's really where my head's at, and I think that's part of the challenge that we have, is we have this expectation in this ever-changing world, and one of the purposes of the research was to kind of expose this and have people share what they're doing. I think Marcina's internship is a good example of that. Marcina, can you explain what that is at Clorox?
Sure. So my internship was a 6-month co-op, and I was in the logistics operations group. I was able to touch all the different aspects of logistics that revolved around our company. So DC operations, transportation, customer supply chain, like all the different groups, and was able to get exposure to that. I know that Clorox actually uses the internship as kind of a feeler for people coming in as entry-level employees, and as also into the supply chain leadership development program that I'm a part of, which also grants me exposure and more definition as far as my career growth goes. So yes, it's very interesting. I enjoyed my internship, worked hard, and here I am.
And that leadership development program was appealing to you in the hiring process, right?
Yes, it was actually one of the reasons that I chose to come to Clorox was because they had a process for the next 3 years. You're going to be in a manufacturing role, you're going to be in a business role, and you're going to be in a technical role. We want you to pick up these skills because we know that with the baby boomers retiring soon, like we need leaders that are able to soak up all of this information that they have and come into the workplace and take their place. Knowing, one, that supply chain is so vast, it's so broad, there's so many different things that you can get into. This was very, very appealing to me because I was like, I have no idea what I want to like concentrate in for supply chain. I just know that I'm really fascinated by it and I love what I do. So being in this role, being in this program is helping me identify like what area of supply chain I would like to be a part of.
We have a question from Michael. He says, I'm a millennial, and a lot of people he feels looks down on him because he doesn't have the level of real-world experience. He says the survey really makes him think that the generations don't see eye to eye. How would you encourage millennials to engage in communication with baby boomers to bridge their differences? I know, Anne, you did a lot of this at Ecolab. Can you share your experience there?
Yeah, it's tricky because, a lot of times millennials can be seen as a little bit, not thinking for themselves and really needing that extra coaching. But what I would say is for baby boomers and Gen X is just don't get frustrated by that. Just understand that what they need is this, step-by-step sort of instruction and guidance and help so that they can really excel. And, if they have just this guidance, and you can kind of work, back and forth with a little push and pull, but give the guidance to try to get them to be able to lead their careers. But they do initially need this guidance.
Yep. So one of the things we want to understand was the ability for people to work and what does work-life balance mean. And we actually found that there's a statistical significance between the hours that the baby boomers are willing to work and those of Gen X and millennials, and that millennials are looking for more work-life balance. So one of the things as we think about job definition for millennials, and we think about remote hours and flexible hours and use of mobile devices and fewer hours behind, team meetings and in a physical office, they're looking for more creative opportunities. And so we do find a statistical significance. The other question that I get is this a global survey? And it was. What we did was we posted on LinkedIn, and I have 176,000 people that followed me on LinkedIn. It's a very global audience. And we continue to get responses to the survey. So if you're in different continents, we'd love to have your voice, as we'll be doing some other work, and we'd like to get some cross-tabbing by geography. We don't have enough responses yet from Asia to be able to do that cross-tabbing, but we are looking for what those continent differences are as well. All right, I'm going to move along now, and we're going to talk a little bit about diversity. And I really believe that we are much better off in supply chain if we can embrace diversity. This is in my definition, diversity of thought, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of color, diversity of sex, diversity of experience. And one of the things we wanted to understand was what are the drivers by classification of employees. And one of the things that I have always felt was that, we had a supply chain group that was primarily Caucasian men in the age of 35 to 60. And that's always been a kind of a disconnect with me as a baby boomer woman. It was very hard. And, one of the things that I found interesting in the study is only 28% of the population was female. And I thought that the percentage of respondents would be higher. Now, I had some pushback from a major Fortune 500 company that said, is the population biased? Is it really 28% female? And, you never know if the population is biased, but the numbers are large enough and the sample is large enough that I still think that we're out of balance with female opportunities in supply chain. Dozier, what do you think?
I think that the balance is starting to get closer. I grew up in businesses that supply chain was a core part of the business, and much of the supply chain organization was very male-dominated, not necessarily because women weren't welcome, but because women didn't necessarily want to be there, or the business had grown through the manual intensive roles that you had to play in the supply chain area that didn't really lend itself to gender diversity. So I think today, as we have more educational opportunities specific to a field like supply chain, I think as the supply chain has become more automated and more technology driven, and I think as supply chain has become as much about the moving of goods as it has about the transactions that flow with it, it's created a playing field where there's equal opportunity, not just for male female, but also for the various diverse thinking styles that we see in business today. So I think it's more of the evolution of how the supply chain has evolved over the years, and the fact that it may have been a lot more male-dominated historically, and maybe we're just catching up.
Yeah, and Rick from Canada says that he's happy to report that the S&OP designation program in Canada had 52% females. Congratulations, Rick. And I think part of it has to do with the population coming in the workforce. When I graduated in chemical engineering in 1978, there were 2 females in my class, right? And there weren't a lot of women that were interested in that particular profession. So I think we have more opportunity. When we look at the data, we find that women want commutes that are easier. They want flexible work hours. Men are more stimulated by talented team and corporate image. Marcina, what do you think about this data?
Actually, this was one of the things that I didn't completely agree with. Personally, I find that most women care about their corporate image and wanting to have a seat at the table, having their voice heard. So being with that talented team and being a part of that group is very important for them. Where I do appreciate my short commute to work, I really do, and the ability to work from home occasionally, I don't find these as the end-all, be-all for what's important for me at a job. I want to be able to be included. I want to be able to be heard. And those are things that go into my ability to advance in the organization and have an impact in my role.
Yeah. Liz also says she doesn't agree with this either from the chat panel. How about you, Ann? What do you think?
Well, I was thinking when I saw this that perhaps the women responding to this were more part of the younger generation, as we're seeing more women enter the supply chain field. So I think, honestly, these things are more important to the younger generation, the millennials. So having the diverse people and ideas and having more of a work-life balance are more important. So that's kind of what I thought when I saw this, that those things are more important to women.
Okay. Now let's go to Caucasian versus non-Caucasian. One of the things that we find, sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is the people of color are looking for more discussion around benefits, diversity, career paths, and making sure that they're going to be taken care of in the development plans. Whereas the Caucasian population that we surveyed kind of takes that for granted. They believe the work's going to be challenging and that they're going to have leaders that they want to admire. But the folks of color are looking for, more definition there. And this actually matches with some of my recruiting experience. Marcina, what do you think of this?
This one I fully agree with. Inclusion is very important, not only to myself but other minorities that I've interacted with. And just knowing that everyone has something to bring to the table, a new and different perspective, whether it is different ideas, background, education, work experiences, race, gender, like those are the things that we need to think about when it comes to the topics of supply chain and the audience that we're selling to our consumers. And I want to see somebody that's in the organization that looks like me at each level of our organization, which helps with the career path and professional development to help people of color get to those different levels. So I completely agree with this information. Inclusion is a big thing. Of course, benefits. I didn't want to go home to my parents and live off of their dime, so having the benefits, having a great salary is important as well, but being included in the conversation is important.
Ann Dozier, I went to a recent women's networking function, and I looked around the room, and there were two people of color, and the discussion was really about women and not necessarily about diversity. And I know you have been a champion of diversity. When you look at this research, and I know your work on being a champion, what would you tell people?
Yeah, so Laura, the thing that I always love about your work is you do an amazing job at collecting the data and providing the data in a way where we can learn from it, and you provide some directional conclusions, but you never say this is what you should do. And so what I really like about this data is it's a great input to help think about how we make sure that we are always focused on diversity and inclusion in the workforce. And, candidly, what I've found is the best way to build a team is to build a team that has a very diverse set of thinking styles, regardless of their cultural backgrounds or their gender or any other type of affinity group label. And so I really find that when we focus on hiring people in a team that have differences in the way they think than you necessarily, it creates great outcomes, but it also automatically allows you to have that diversity and inclusion, because different thinking styles are sometimes developed by different backgrounds and cultures and the way that you grew up in society. So I don't necessarily focus on the data as much around Caucasian or non-Caucasian or female or male. I focus on how do I make sure that I have a team that thinks holistically. And if I have a team that thinks holistically, what I find is naturally we tend to get a team that's very diverse. I do think it's important, though, as we hire, to think about making sure that we don't hire people just like us. So I think we as companies have to make conscious decisions on making sure that we implement the practices in hiring to ensure that we're not always looking for people just like us, that we're looking for that diversity of thinking, which also leads to the diverse backgrounds as well.
So we have a response of don't different thinking styles slow down the process. And it can, right? But I think you get to better outcomes, and you've got to be a different kind of leader to embrace different thinking styles. You know, it's maybe harder to get to yes, but the path's worth it, in my opinion. Would you agree, Ann?
I 100% agree. It is much harder to get a diverse group of thinkers together toward a common end goal, but I absolutely agree that the result is better. So, you know, you might have to take a little bit more time up front, but once that team becomes a high-performing team, the output is amazing. And what I also find is as you are moving forward to try to drive the change in the organization, because you've had that diverse group of thinking as part of the development of the solution, the way that you're presenting it to the end user that's ultimately going to have to take on the change is usually very well thought out as well, because again, you're covering all the thinking styles.
Yep, and
Great
I think
point.
Ann Kalinowski, you had a thought there as well.
Yeah, that's almost exactly what I was going to say. And especially now, as fast as things are changing with data and technology, you want people who think a little bit differently, think a little outside of the box, because that's what's going to happen to move supply chains forward.
Yep, and I think you know, there's no one right answer. What I would suggest to people is they put these slides up on a team meeting and they ask their team what they value and they listen. I think so many times we assume we understand what people value, and the more we can hold ourselves accountable for listening and for basically helping teams to move forward on what matters, the better off we are. I'm often surprised that, you know, I'm so unconscious of what motivates people, and I've got to ask. I've got to force myself to not be within my own paradigm. So one of the other things we wanted to find out is just where are we on skills and people for the workforce against the available jobs. And we find that the greatest skill gaps are in the area of planning. Demand planning leads the list, then data scientists, then supply planners, and then S&OP. But we're not having the same problem getting people in supply chain execution roles. And I know, Ann, you've come out of a demand planning role. What did you think when you saw this data?
Oh, I'm not surprised at all, especially with how SKU proliferation has been occurring in companies. Forecasting is becoming more and more difficult. There's more complexity in your supply chain, you know, more warehouses where you're selling product out of, more SKUs, higher volatility than for selling these SKUs. And so being a demand planner is a really tough role. And there's going to be more and more need for it, as you see here.
Yeah, one of the most popular blogs I've ever written is, have you given your demand planner some love today? Because most demand planners don't get a lot of love. Marcina, how do you feel about this? Is this what you see in the industry?
I agree. This is definitely what I see. This is the trends for the top jobs that are in demand. I'm also seeing that those analyst roles are adding more responsibility for customer service. I'm technically in a customer service type role. I'm connecting with the customers, but I'm also expected to be an analyst and help with planning. So there's more added responsibility. You're not just a customer service rep. You're not just a manufacturing planner. There's more thinking added onto it. So,
yep, more need for analysis. And okay, now, Ann, you've seen some of this work, Ann Dozier. You know, how do we build these people to fill these gaps? Do companies like yours have to build them yourself? Do you work with academics to bring them into the workforce? How do we fill the gaps?
I think it's a combination, just like many new roles. First of all, I think we have to think about the type of talent that we are trying to attract. So Historically, the supply chain was much more process-oriented. It was much more engineering-focused, much more kind of hands-on technical. And now we do see a lot of the supply chain roles much more analytical and kind of forward-thinking, demand-driven type roles. So we have to make sure that as we are looking for folks coming out of university or coming from other companies, that we're looking for those people that are more forward-thinking, strategic thinkers, and have experience with not only the physical supply chain, but the information that flows with the supply chain. I think at the same time, we have to take those individuals in the company that have grown up with the actual physical supply chain and how it works, and we have to attach those individuals to those great data scientists in order to teach them how to think about the way the supply chain works so that they can think about the algorithms that we need to build to make it better. So, I go back to a comment I think, Marlena, you made at the beginning about millennials feeling more comfortable with change. I think this is a great way to tie the boomer generation with the millennial generation to actually drive that change faster, because obviously the supply chain as it has evolved to be more about future state and forecasting versus actual doing, we've had to think more about how do we plan versus how do we execute.
Yeah, and we're still
although the
evolving
execution is
there.
really important.
It is, right? But, greater analytics, one of the things we see is that next generation supply chain thinking is a gap for companies. We've grown up in traditional technologies, rows and columns, relational databases, not a lot of mobility, not a lot of open source code, not a lot of experience with some of, cognitive computing or robotics or autonomous supply chains or Internet of Things. And so as we think about the confluence of technology and opportunities in the building of outside-in processes, one of the rubs that we see is the millennials want to push hard to get it done, right? They're questioning our traditional systems, whereas the baby boomers are kind of holding on to those next generation processes. So Marcina, what do you see there, and what's your advice for the listening audience?
Yes, I agree. It's a challenge that we face coming into the industry. I know that I was brought into the company. One of the purposes of our program is to bring a fresh perspective on the work that we're doing, to find new ways to do a process, make it more efficient, more effective, cost-saving. And so when we find these new ways of doing things, I oftentimes get a lot of blowback from the baby boomers that are like, if the process isn't broke, why are you trying to fix it? Like, I'm about to retire. I don't feel like learning. Like, this seems really complicated. And I'm like, no, it's not. I promise I can walk you through it. But it's that hesitancy with change. And I feel we can still work through it. I am all about collaboration and working with it, but it is something that I feel this challenge can hurt organization not being able to adapt to it and move faster. There's other companies, other groups that are able to adapt quicker, are getting things out to market faster, and it's because they're able to adapt to these changes. So it's something that is going to have to be faced one way or another.
And my worldview is we don't have best practices, we have traditional practices, and our traditional practices are inside out. They're not outside in. They're not about the shopper or the customer, and they're not necessarily about sensing and driving an intelligence response. So there's a big need, I think, for us to really think about our supply chain thinking. But Anne, I know when leading the demand sensing project and some of your work, you face this challenge as well. What would you tell the audience?
It's similar to what Marcina said. Especially leadership needs to be open to change and needs to encourage change within the organization. We can't just do things the way we've done them because that's the way they've been done. Technology is moving too fast. You'll be behind the ball if you are not open to change. So that's what I would say. And then focusing.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say focusing on recruiting people that are open to change and recruiting people who are different than others in the organization is really important.
So back to diversity. Anne, what one thing would you tell the listening audience out of the session today? What would be your takeaway?
I think for me, it's all about making sure that we have a diversity of thinking and making sure that we are building the right strategies to be able to bridge that boomer workforce that has a ton of knowledge that they can teach with that group of young professionals that are coming into the industry with a lot of excitement and interest in driving change that ultimately takes our companies to the next level.
Yeah, and it's, a challenge, because so much is changing. Anne Kalinowski, what would you have as the last piece of advice for the listening audience?
I would just say, again, be open to change, create great leadership and training programs, and be open to new ideas.
And Marcina, your last piece of advice?
I would say be comfortable with the uncomfortable. Don't look at millennials as a nuisance. We have the potential to do great things when given the opportunity. Leverage our skills. We're more than willing to work hard to better the organization. And just know that the uneasiness that you feel, we also feel that too. The feelings are definitely mutual, so we can work together to make a win-win situation.
I think that's wonderful advice, being comfortable with the uncomfortable. And one of the things we want to do is try to help people do that. So every year we have a conference, and it's focused on the world of 2030 and imagining the possibilities. There are 5 themes. We go through where are we on helping supply chain leaders to meet the supply chain metrics that matter and the supply chains to admire work, changing economies and changing times. We have a speaker from Harvard who's going to talk about globalization versus nationalism and the rise of India and China in 2030, the digital supply chain, some great case studies on paperless systems and robotics and Internet of Things and cognitive computing. And then that change management issue, people talking about how they've actually dealt with it, and supply chain talent. It's in Greensboro, Georgia this year. It's open for registration at our website, which is on this slide, and we hope to see people there. And if they can't make it in person, we will live cast it, and we expect about 5,000 people around the world to watch the live cast. And the live cast is free, so teams all around the world can listen to it, and we hope to have a social discussion. We're also this month kicking off our Academy on Next Generation Supply Chain Thinking. We've built 7 online courses, and Anne's going to be our facilitator, Anne Kalinowski, on the Cross Company Academy. Right now we've got 40 people that have signed up for the Cross Company Academy, and it kicks off in May and ends in November for these 7 classes. And if somebody wants to take the classes and focus a couple on their own organizations, we'd be glad to help. We want to help people to take that next leap in next generation talent building. And with that, we share all of our research online. We published our 102nd report today in our newsletter, which went out to 25,000 people. We want to engage with people socially through our website, through our blogs, through our community, which is Beat Fusion, which is where people can post resumes, post jobs, and also through our monthly webinar series. So thank you for your time. We will be sharing both this webinar and the slides with you as a follow-up. Helen, back to you, and thanks to my panel.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks to the panel and everyone who is listening today. Like Laura said, we will be sending the slides and the recording out to you within the next 24 hours, so keep an eye out for a follow-up email. We also encourage you to engage with us on social media by following us on Twitter, joining our LinkedIn, as well as now liking our Facebook page and following us on SlideShare. You can find this information in the slide deck. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.